Last night we began with getting settled in the practice. The body, the breath, and the mind. I spoke of them as three different things, but of course, as the practice matures, we come to see they are not just three different things. They are unified, one in the practice. As the practice matures, as we get truly settled, the seeking after pleasure or pleasurable states, seeking to avoid pain or painful states, this whole endless up and down, back and forth, gradually dissolves of its own accord. We don't have to push them away or pull them towards us. They just gradually dissolve. Again, I urge you to experience this in your own body, breath, and mind. To see what it is to be truly settled and stable. Once you are, then what? Then what? When the mind, which includes everything, when the mind, that is when all comes fully to rest, what's there? What is that? This is what must be made clear in our practice, in our sitting, and in our daily lives. All the way through. What remains? Does self remain? Does an other remain? Does pleasure remain? Does pain remain? You might have an experience of being free from both pleasure and pain. This can be quite liberating to realize that at bottom, although there is, of course, pain and pleasure constantly, at bottom, I am free from both pleasure and pain. This is good. Recognize it. But the point is to be free from the very need to be free. Otherwise, you're just a cat chasing its own tail. This is where the practice really has matured. Again, unless you are free from the very need to be free from something, anything, to be, even to be free even from that, you're not yet free. You're still bound by yourself. Make it clear. That is what it is to sit all the way through. And then to stand up from that and do what needs to be done. And when nothing needs to be done, enjoy yourself. What I have just said might sound rather abstract and hard to grasp. That's fine. You have to grasp it from within. But to clarify this and to make it really concrete, I would like to turn now to the concern of pain, a very realistic concern for most of us. How do we deal with the pain that we experience in Zazen? What should we do with it and what should we not do with it? I would like to now turn for a brief Dharma talk to Alan S. He is a long-time experienced practitioner, also a guiding member of the Buddhist Society in London. So let us now turn our attention to him. Alan?
First, I'd like to thank Jeff for asking me to speak on this really quite important subject. Pain is something that's really quite natural. It may seem strange to say that because I don't think anybody would argue that pain is unpleasant, really, noxious, awful. But yet it's something that's quite natural and it's essential for our survival. I remember seeing a documentary about people who are born who could not feel any pain at all. And they don't survive that long because there isn't that alarm that's there. And that's what pain is. It's an alarm bell. It's an alert, a little bit like what you see on your car dashboard. If you're running out of fuel or oil, engine's heating up, a red light flashes up. And this is what pain is. It's alerting us to something. It's saying, have a look. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to run away from it, but it's saying to us, look, what's there? Pay attention. We don't always have to run away from pain. We've all had that experience. If we're doing something physical, it may be uncomfortable, like if we're training for sports or even just doing gardening, we do feel pain, or we develop those things, and yet we don't give up. We carry on. We carry on because we can see the benefits of it. But the problem is our reaction to pain is often an emotional one because it is so unpleasant. And that emotional reaction is fired up by fear. What is it that we worry about when we are confronted with pain? But on one end of the scale, we might be concerned that what is causing us pain may kill us, like a crushing weight on your chest, pain down the arm. My God, I'm having a heart attack, I could be dying. So it may be a real concern. But with other kinds of pain, particularly the pain that we feel at these retreats, it's different. Because what we're afraid of is that that pain may not come to an end, may not see an end to it. And I also may be afraid that I won't be able to bear it. I won't be able to bear it. What am I going to do? How am I going to survive if I can't put up with this pain? And that emotional fear results in usually one of two reactions. One is to run away from it. And what does that mean? It means that I may think, well, I just can't do these retreats. I just can't manage the pain. It's not for me. It's just a macho thing, these people who sit for hours in pain. I mean, it's not for me. I mean, look, mostly men here, aren't we? I mean, it must be a macho thing. I'm not going to do these retreats and things. It's just too much to bear. Or what we might try and do, what we do is to fight it. Take up arms against it. And when we do that, what we do is that we just feed it. We just feed that fear further with that emotional strength that comes out. And then we make it 10 times worse when we do that. So neither of those things are terribly helpful. And in fact, if we want to find that real peace of heart, then we're not going to manage that. We're not going to discover that. We're not going to really settle what's really truly in our hearts, which is to find that peace of heart by running away or by fighting it in one way or the other. It really struck me at one particular session, a retreat, and it was in the second or third day at the end of a long sitting, and I was sitting there, and in my head I was screaming, "Oh my God, if I can't bear this any longer, when is the jikki going to hit that bell? Please hit that bell." And then all kinds of thoughts came up. I'm sure he's asleep. I'm sure he's just fallen asleep. And we're going to sit here, and oh my God, I'm not going to manage it. And I even heard of this story in San Francisco where the jikki walked out the room and went shopping and left everybody sitting there until he came back. It's just unbearable. I can't manage it. Anyway, finally the bell rang, and then suddenly there was sort of a wave of relief. But what was interesting was what followed, because in that particular group, when the bell went, you still couldn't move. The jikki had to get up, tidy the cushions, bow to the cushion, bow to the room, go to the altar, bow to the altar, blow out the candles, take 3 steps back, bow 3 times, turn around, walk out of the room, go to the door, bow, and then leave. And only then could you move. But what was interesting was that the moment the bell went, then there was that wave of relief. And yet the pain was still there. But the fight was over. The fight was over. And so there was that moment of detachment when, yes, the pain was there, but there was no longer the battle with it. It was just accepted for that moment. So if we are to find that peace of heart that we so much wish for, then we have to be able to sit with it and sit quietly with it and to accept it and to open up to it. Not to fight it and not to try and run away from it. So in summary, what not to do is to try and deny it in any kind of way, or try and look for it in any kind of way. This is a religious practice. Some people feel I must suffer. Try and make it worse. Not to do that. Not to pretend that it doesn't exist either, or it is there. And as we know, something Jeff often mentions, our physical bodies aren't made for sitting still for hours on end. And so pain is likely to arise. There's no question of that. So to accept that it will be there. And what to do is that acceptance, that opening up, that sitting with it. And in that way, if we do learn to sit with it, then it is actually possible to develop what is known as that Zazen strength, that ability just to sit with things, no matter how painful they are. And we're not only talking about physical pain, but also those difficult things that will arise when we're sitting in a session. Seeing into how foolish I'll be, my moments of selfishness, self-centeredness or arrogance. I have to be able to sit and look at those things as well, not to run away from those either, painful as they may be part of that, and to open up into what at this very moment is, whatever it is, just to be open to that. Thank you very much for listening.
You, if anyone has a question or a concern come out of the practice, please feel free to speak up for the benefit of all. And Alan, if you could briefly repeat the question.
Both very much. I was wondering about your thoughts about positive emotions. Jeff mentioned them yesterday. You talked about fear, but also of pleasure this morning as well. And I wondered if what you mentioned about not running away and that the methods around pain were the same around positive emotions, around beauty or flow. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts about those, how to work with positive emotions.
So the question is how to work with positive emotions, in essence. Well, like anything, with our practice, the positive things, just like the negative things, can be a problem if we become attached to them, and that we start to chase after them, because our tendency is to push away that which we dislike and to try and grasp and get hold of that which we do like. And yet the underlying attachment, the underlying grasping or pushing away is actually the same thing. It's the same thing. So when we work with those things, those pleasant things, those pleasures, those enjoyments, it's not to deny that we can experience that. It's fine to experience that, which is enjoyable. Fine day like we see outside, yes, it's great, but it's not to become attached to it in the sense that this afternoon it pours with rain and I become miserable. It's to become aware of that, to become aware of those conflicting emotions, of that grasping, and that's how we work with it. One thing I forgot to mention with regards to the pain is that when we listen to it, if it's simply a question of changing our posture, then we can do that. It's fine to do. We don't have to sit in the pain necessarily if it's simply a question of finding another position and adjusting ourselves.
Not so much just for myself, but maybe for some others. There's pain and then there's injury to the body. How would you advise people to differentiate between the two?
The question is, how does one differentiate between pain and injury to the body? That's not an easy question.
Sorry.
And I think I can only speak of my own experience. And I would say that a pain that doesn't resolve itself once one gets up and starts to walk around and ease off, then one needs to look at it again. If it's a pain that continually persists, even though we've stopped sitting and we've got up, we've walked around, we've stretched, and it's still really there quite severe, then we need to think again about, our posture, position, and so on. One thing to mention that I wanted to, that reminds me, is that one technique somebody showed me many years ago, which I found very useful, is that if we're sitting in pain, is when we breathe out, is to breathe into that painful area. I think Master Hackman described it as, someone said to me, like warm treacle going through the body. If you just breathe into that warmth through the area that's uncomfortable, that's painful, then it just eases things off. You might find that helpful.
Perhaps it's helpful, with reference to what we just been said, to recognise that there's a very distinct neurological and psychological difference between acute pain and chronic pain. What we bear in the sitting posture is acute pain, defined as pain which disappears or lessens significantly when we change position or posture. So that pain that we are bearing is caused by accumulation of metabolites, inflammation, which is exciting the nerves. The nerves get excited and send the signal to the central nervous system, as described. The warning flashlight is coming in. Yeah, water's low, heat's rise. So perhaps we can, perhaps it's helpful for us to realise that the pain that the posture is qualitatively different from chronic pain, possibly caused by long-term injury, yeah, which substantially changes our neurology. However, there's an overlap between our emotional reaction to this, which is essentially sensation.
Yes.
Yeah. If we have a chronic condition, arthritis, low back pain, many different sorts, it qualitatively changes our neurology and we become sensitized to it, and it ignites, I think that's the right word, a whole set of emotional responses: fear, of wanting to escape from, and lots of forward projections about how will this ever end, how's it going to affect me, and the whole cascade of vexations coalesces. So the point I'm trying to make is that perhaps it helps us to realise that what we are experiencing is no more than the warning light coming on and is sensation, and anything else that goes around it is completely different. Completely different.
I think that's my whole talk. Yeah.
Osteopathic brain.
It was very comprehensive. Can I suggest a summary? I have an injury here, so chronic pain.
Yep.
And I think we've all felt a little bit of acute pain, here and there. Before I did appreciate the scientific explanation, but what I've always done is just really looked inside myself and thought, almost questioned myself, looked at my intuition. Is this just arising and passing away, or is this injuring my body? And I think most of us know the difference inside ourselves. I think if we really look, we can kind of sense that difference. That's what I've used as a guiding post. I don't know if it's a summarize actually.
Yes, so what Adam was saying is that we look within ourselves to see whether the pain we're feeling is something that's injurious, because I suppose we can say that the body has wisdom of its own,
exactly that.
and to be able to open up and to listen to that rather than that emotional fear and so on, which comes on top of it and tends to blind that wisdom.
Yes.
I think that would summarize.
Avoid that ego reaction.
Yeah.
I'm going to injure my knee, so Jeff passes me in one-on-one. So,
Can I just ask a question? You mentioned pleasurable and non-pleasurable emotions. But I just want to clarify, it's not that we're going into a bland place by dealing with either of them. It's actually, they're both valuable, the painful and the pleasurable, as signs that we need to pay attention to in order to help us deal with whatever is underlying as well, so that emotions themselves are not negative things in any way. Have I asked that clear?
I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Well, the question is whether when we're dealing with emotions, whether they're negative and positive, that by dealing with them, we're not seeking to reach a point of being very bland without emotion.
Right. So you're saying when we're feeling these emotions, negative or positive, we shouldn't be trying to suppress them completely
Or clear them out.
or push them out the way, that they should be experienced for what they are.
And valued as well.
And of course, and valued, because that is what we're feeling just at this very moment, are those emotions and those experiences. But I think also we need to consider if they are having a negative effect on how we are in this moment as well. In other words, if anger is arising, it is felt, it is lived, we are with it, but we don't necessarily have to let it burst out. That can be held, not suppressed, but just held. And the same thing with the other side as well, is not to be carried away by those things, but not to deny them either. I think that's just as a general principle in our practice, actually. We are to experience what is being experienced just at this very moment. But it is how we respond to what is being experienced, which is actually the critical factor in our practice, isn't it? Because what we want to do is to respond in a way that's appropriate to this moment, and with all the fundamental underlying principles of our practice, kindness, compassion, and so on and so forth.
When the acute pain comes up that we expect to come up in Zaza, do you have any sort of tips or advice for dealing with sitting through the pain or dealing with the emotions that come up that can feel very real at the time?
So the question is, when the acute pain arises, do we have any tips as to how to deal with that? As you know, it's coming up. Yeah. So a little bit, as I've mentioned already, to be aware of that pain that does come up and not to fight it or push it away. And as I said, also to breathe into it, to go right into it, and using that technique of that flow and that warmth just to go through that area, that part of the body that's uncomfortable. And you find actually that what happens is that it then starts to diminish. It won't go away completely, but it'll be diminished and it'll be manageable. And as somebody else has mentioned, to remember that it's impermanent. In other words, the bell will ring. He hasn't gone shopping, hasn't got home. He will ring it. And just to remember that as well, because there is that fear that comes out, oh my God, I'm never going to manage this, it's never going to come to an end.
Could I just add a little bit extra to that? There's a good response. Also, with the mental pain that comes up, maybe some repressed emotions. There was a point in my own sitting where just all of a sudden a whole load of stuff would just come up, and it wasn't come up regardless of what I did. I spoke to Jeff about it at the time, and he gave very good advice. He said very simply, let it come up, don't repress it, just let it come up, let it be what it is, and just let it go. So you're not repressing it, and you're not pushing it away, but then you're not chasing after it. And it sounds simple, but you know, like a lot of those things in life, often the simplest thing is often the most real, profound, or helpful. It was to me. Maybe linked to that, some of the emotions that came up with it in reference to what Jenny said. It wasn't a case of more genuine emotions underlying, you know, some other stuff being lessened or deadened, but with maybe just a bit less self-attachment. They were, if anything, more relaxed, both the negative and the positive. Feeling angry here, just more anger, but a bit less turning into something or holding on to, and then seeing something marvelous. Just feel that and enjoying it. Again, not kind of letting my mind do that quite so much, which frankly does too much. So that can be helpful. And with that mental pain, the other thing I noticed, it might be worth some of you have experienced. I always thought there's physical pain and mental pain, almost totally separate. But I did notice at points that there was, like, I don't know, certain stuff that was coming up and sitting, and it was almost, without sounding too strange, manifesting a little bit physically. You know, so maybe there's some genuine, a bit of ache and pain in the body from sitting however many hours. But then there's some emotional stuff coming up, and then that pain was just intensifying. Some people have said, like, trauma or some past experience can be almost like an emotion is held in parts of your body. I don't know if that's true, frankly, but anyway, I did definitely find that there was a little bit of a connection. And so again, not running away from that, but just sitting through and just keeping going with the practice. And if it was too painful to be in one posture, just simply change the posture. But not running away from the practice was for me the key point. And I realized after a little while that that was part of what my pain was. It was just another way of trying to run away. Either I'd start daydreaming over here, or if I somehow could just let that go and get back to the practice, then suddenly it's pain. You'd be like, okay, you know, I can see what's going on here. It's like distracting thought, pain, another distracting thought, you know, this type of thing. And the rest is my mind just. I'm not saying all pain is a distracted mind, but definitely some purpose.
It may be that when you're thinking of those things, that you tensed up. And
Yes,
that's what
likely.
made the physical pain worse.
Very
That's
likely.
the most likely thing.
Mm.
And so just to summarize, just very briefly, Adam was saying that when he had moments of unpleasant things coming up, the mild physical pain that he's feeling tended to get much worse.
Yes.
Can I just offer one tip in response to Holly? I think when pain arises, to stop that fear going with it, we tend to separate from the body in a way, the body becomes an enemy. I just find just bowing to the body, you know, if it is the red light on the dashboard coming on, thank you very much. You know, now I'm not going to have the car blow up in my face. So it's useful, I find, just to bow and say thank you for the warming light, and it avoids that turning the body into an enemy.
Can you just briefly summarize them? Again, try to keep your comments as brief and to the point as you can, otherwise you've got a heck of a
Good job there. So Martin was saying when the pain arose, when the alert came up, just to say thank you to that, and not turn the body into an enemy, but rather grateful that it's lighted up something for us to pay attention to.
Maybe one more question before we get to the.
Thank you very much for your talk. I've noticed in my experience, as the practice has developed, that at some point or another, that separation between pain and suffering becomes clearer, and you can feel the pain without necessarily needing to suffer from the pain. And actually, interestingly for me, when that first happened and that suffering fell away, pleasure actually arose probably from the physical pain, but there was a kind of pleasure which arose from the fact that I was separated from the suffering. I don't know if that's, from what I read and heard from others, that does sound like an experience that was shared. So I didn't know if you potentially speak to sometimes when you have those conflicting experiences where almost the emotional, the emotion and physical might kind of feel quite distinct, or even that you might feel conflicting or contradictory emotions at one given moment, rather than say all pleasurable or all non-pleasurable.
So I didn't understand the question.
Sorry,
What is your point in one sense?
sorry. When you feel conflicting emotions or experiences,
Like pleasure or pain.
like pleasure, potentially pleasure and pain at once, how we might respond to that. Apologies. But, sorry for the randomness of the question.
Not really sure I understand.
At least you don't have to translate it into another language.
I could try.
Sorry, I didn't mean for it to be intended.
I don't think I can answer. Sorry.
No,
Yeah, I'll try to say it. Maybe, speaking of pain, we would all like to stand up and stretch for a moment. Please, thank you again, Hal.